Well, if you've ended up at this video, then you have probably run into the Stiction problem with the Warthog joystick. Although still the best joystick on the market, it has one flaw that seems to be a very common one, and that's the Stiction. The first thing that I do before I disassemble is do a test. So I go into my joystick setup and test it out. Now you can notice on this one when I'm doing it, as it's coming back to center, how much the stiction is a problem with the stick. Especially right here when I pull it back and let it come forward. It just sticks right there, springs right forward, and that is the big problem with these sticks. So we're going to fix that. Let's get started with this. So first thing we're going to do is remove the handle. To remove the handle, just unspin the clasp at the bottom and just pull it straight off. I just put it on a towel and set it off to the side for now. And then we're going to go ahead and remove the cover, or the faceplate, whatever you'd like to call it. It's a simple removement. Just remove all the screws, and then the top of the actual base. The top of the actual base is held on by 4 screws. You'll need to remove all 4, but the last one, wait till you have pressure with your fingers. You're going to need to put pressure right on the top of it and hold the spring down while you pull it off so you do not strip it. Once you pull that last screw out, the top just lifts right off, and now you have access to the inside of the base of the stick. Cleaning and removing all the parts as I remove them and putting them away in an organized manner makes it easier to keep track and put the stick back together. You'll notice that the old grease is a red tint to it. And next we're going to go ahead and remove the plastic housing off of the base. And at the top of the housing on the inside, you'll notice that it has some pads. These help keep the spring in its place. You'll want to remember that them go on the top of this housing. Once that's cleaned, I'm going to go ahead and remove what I call the pressure plate, which keeps the pressure on the gimbal. This also carries the O-ring that everybody's wondering where it is. And this is one of the parts of the joystick that's causing one of the biggest problems. What happens is it starts to lose its adhesion to where it's mounted right here. And you can see in this one it's loose in some areas. If it's loose in some areas, my recommendation is to go ahead and just remove it and run it without the O-ring at all. If you want an O-ring in there, then you can search online for one of the Teflon O-rings that I keep seeing different mixed reviews on, but they seem to be doing okay. You can see here where the adhesive was not sticking in certain places. And what eventually happens is the O-ring starts to move and then bunches up and then starts to actually come through the hole in the top, which makes it to where the stick starts to actually get off-centered. So after I've got that removed, I'm going to go ahead and clean it. And I clean it with alcohol and a Q-tip until I've got everything off of it, and then I just go ahead and dry it right after that. And I'll do that with pretty much every part that had grease on it. Next, I'm going to start just removing the springs off of the lower plate, which held the pressure plate up. And once I get all the springs off, go ahead and clean the grease off again. On the bottom, you'll notice that it has 2 connectors, one large, one small, and then these are the 2 screws that hold the circuit board on. And then you have 4 screws that hold the lower gimbal section of the ball on. And then these 4 screws right here are for the silver mounting plates for the top, and you will not be touching them. So we'll go ahead and just remove the 2 wire connections, and they just pull straight out, and I'll set them aside. And the first thing I'm going to remove is the ground coming from the circuit board, and it actually has 2 grounds, one on each side, and we're going to remove both of them. And just make sure you have something to keep your screws in so that they don't get lost, and they shouldn't be in there very hard. These screws are actually the hardest ones, but they're not very tight. So as you remove them, you'll see that I'm leaving the 2 vertical screws, the one underneath the board and the one that's beside it. I'll leave them be for right now. I'm going to go ahead and remove the circuit board, taking the 2 screws out of it, and they are the smallest screws on the whole thing. Once they're removed, I can just go ahead and lift the board right up. Be careful, don't touch the board in the center. Try to handle it on the sides because static electricity from your body, things like that, can actually damage the board. I've heard of people breaking this solder joint right here, but it's easily soldered back if you accidentally do it. But we're doing this assembly or this disassembly without breaking it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that other screw that was under the board. I'm going to leave one in that's holding the gimbal on, and then I'm going to remove the screws of the sensor plate. Actually, this is a little plug that the sensor sits on top of. You'll see in just a moment. Once I've got the two screws out, you can notice that they are pretty much the second smallest. You just pop it right out. It pulls right out. Then I'll go ahead and remove that last screw holding the lower gimbal section together, and then it just pulls right apart. Once I've got it apart, I'll set it aside and clean up a section on it just to get it ready for marking. Now, I like to mark my parts a lot of times, depending, especially if it's the first time I'm disassembling something. So go ahead and clean off a section and then mark it with something so that you can make sure that it goes back together the way that it came. Next thing, you just pull it right apart. The upper gimbal section will separate from the lower gimbal. Just be careful with your wires. Right here is the magnet, which the sensor senses as you move, and then you'll see the wires coming through. Again, be careful with the wires as you pull them through. Now right here you'll see the inside swivel. You can see it sticking. It sticks pretty hard actually, and you'll notice on yours if you're doing this it's not very smooth. So we're going to be fixing that. Now pull the wire out, and on the inside of the actual swivel you can see that it has a large indentation or a cutout section. That cutout section is for your wires, and I'm going to mention it multiple times during this disassembly to be careful with this on the reassembly of it. So we're going to take out the little plugs that hold in the swivel ball, and I'm going to be using a pair of snap ring pliers for this in reverse. So I'm pushing on the handles and they're going to push out on the side. Now you can also use a screwdriver pushing from one side to the other. Just be careful not lose your plug and block it as you pull it out. It does take a little bit of pressure, but it will pop right out. Just be careful in the process. Now this is one of the problems with it. Again, it has all these little sections that are not smooth. You notice how my thumb stuck on the sides, and the sides are not very smooth, not allowing a good swivel or a good smooth operation. So I'm going to mark the inside swivel ball with the outside lower gimbal section, and make sure, so that way I can make sure I put them back together the same way. I'll pop out the other plug, and the inside swivel ball is ready to be removed. So I'm just going to turn on the side, stick my finger from the bottom, and just push it right out, and it'll pop out pretty easily. Alright, with that removed, now I'm going to go ahead and clean up all my parts again. Cleaning off all the grease with the rag, and then after the rag we're going to go ahead and use the alcohol with the Q-tip and then get all that old grease out of there. I don't want any of it in there, and I want to start with a very clean plate. So don't forget any of the sections that you've actually already taken apart. Don't forget the holes in the side of the lower gimbal. Don't forget the swivel ball holes right here. Now after that, you can see that the indentation in the side that's designed for the wires to go through much better. And we'll tackle that when we do the assembly. On the sides of the lower gimbal, you'll see that on the ball section here, you can see how bad the joint is right there. It's got a pretty good lip on it. We're going to be smoothing that out as well. So I just wanted to show you that. And on the inside, you can see that they're not clean either. As when they punched the holes, it left little lips of plastic. So if you have larger lips, you can use a razor blade, a really sharp one, to kind of scrape off the bigger lips a little easier. If they're not so big, then you can just wait and use the sandpaper when we get to that. On the inside of this one, it had quite a bit. It had a couple of big lips. So we're going to be using 3 different types of sandpaper. I'm going to be starting with a 400 grit, and then I'm going to move to an 800, and then 1000. You can end on the 800 or use a 4, 6, and an 8, or just go from 4 to 8 if you want to work a little bit more. So I'm just going to cut a strip of the 400 out first, and I'm going to roll it. And I want to roll it small enough to fit into the hole of the swivels. So I'll stick it in a hole and just roll it in my fingers inside the swivel. You want it a little bit tight, and then you want to sand the inside of the swivel. What we're trying to do is enlarge the hole just a little bit because the plugs that go through it are a little too tight and it's causing it to stick. Now you want to be careful and not to overdo it, so you want to test your plugs as you're doing this. And then I'll get the outside of the hole with a flat piece of the sandpaper until it's smooth. And just keep repeating the process until you get it, pretty much smooth. Next, I'm going to be folding a piece of paper for the inside of the lower portion of the gimbal. You can see how I kind of folded it here. It's a little bit different, but just enough to fit in there, and it's doubled over and gives you enough weight to kind of sand the inside. Now what I'm sanding is where them lips were, or if you have a smaller lip of the plastic that was punched up, sticking up, the sandpaper will take care of it pretty good. So we're just going to sand that until it's smooth. Now keep in mind, do not sand the inside of the holes of this lower section. That's where the upper section or the inside section of the plugs snap in. So we do not want to disturb any of that. We want them to fit snugly. Now sanding the outside of the gimbal, you'll notice the seams right here, and we're trying to just get them seams completely out of here and the whole side smooth. If you marked the outside earlier, you'll notice we're going to be sanding that right off here because it just happened to be in the spot of the seam. So I just marked the inside a little bit, that way I can line it up later. Now you'll see the seam here. It's still not smooth. You'll see the areas where it's not sanded as the sandpaper kind of jumps over the seam. Once we've got them seams sanded down smooth with the 400 grit, I'll move to the inside of the swivel ball, the top section, and it just helps a little bit with the movement. Alright, next we're going to tackle the plugs. And here's what I'm talking about the plugs. You'll see that they have two different sections. The inside sections toward the cap we are not going to touch. So we're going to wrap the sandpaper around the end section of it, and then we're just going to twist it around there. And twist it until it's smooth and it fits inside the hole. Now test it as you go. Another way to do it, if it's hard to hold with your fingers, is get a pair of pliers and hold it on the cap. Just don't push too hard because you don't want to damage the cap. And then twist with your fingers again. Next, everything that we've done, we're going to move in and use the 800 grit now instead of the 400 grit. We're going to do every piece that we just sanded again, but with the 800. And then we're going to move to the 1000 grit. And then once you're done with the 1000 grit, that'll be it with the sanding. Keep in mind, as you're doing this, make sure that you're testing your plugs as you go, because you do not want to sand too much off of them. And you'll see right here I'm testing the plug, and mine worked out pretty good. But I tested as I went as well and did not sand too much off. You don't want any space, or it'll cause a little bit of a gap in the joystick, so you've got to be careful with that. Next, we're going to sand the caps of the plugs. So I'm going to get a flat surface with a piece of the sandpaper. Same thing with sandpaper 468 or 46000, depending on what you have. And then we're just going to run it in circles until we get the cap of it smooth. And then I want to take the edges of the caps off, just a little bit of the edge. So I hold it off to the side and then twist it. Next, I want to go ahead and test my caps again, or test my plugs again, excuse me, until they're smooth. If they're not turning smoothly in there, then I'm going to find the section and then sand it back off until I've got it correct. Next, I'm going to go ahead and clean all of the pieces that I just sanded with the alcohol and Q-tips, and just make sure everything's cleaned up and ready to go. Alright, the grease I'm using is a Lumar winch grease. It is plastic safe, and I have had it in my stick for over a year now, and it works great. So I'm just going to take a little bit off, and I'm going to put it on the sides of the swivel that contact the inside of the lower gimbal section. And then I'm going to put them on the inside of the lower gimbal section. And I want to put them on the inside of the lower gimbal section. I'm going to put it all the way around. Now you can be generous with the grease. The only parts that you need to be careful with the grease is don't get it on any of the electronics. And try to keep it off of the magnet as well. So anywhere the electronics are going, just keep it out of that. Alright, so once I've got my grease on the sides. Go ahead and put my half swivel ball in, and then I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the ends of my plugs. And as you can see right here how I've got it. Now I'm going to go ahead and set it up and push my plug right in. Now I'm not pushing it all the way in because I don't have the other plug in. I'm going to wait until I get the other side plug in first. So I'll set my other plug up, get a little bit of grease, set it up, put it on there. And once I've got that grease on, I'm going to go ahead and put that plug into the other side. Now that I've got both plugs in and they're lined up perfectly, I'm going to go ahead and squeeze them together as hard as I can until they snap in. And I just want to make sure that they're in all the way. Now once I've got the plugs all the way in, I'm going to test the swivel. It should be much better than what it was before, and you'll notice a huge difference. This one ended up pretty much buttery smooth. With the testing done, you can see that the plugs are in and smooth on the side, but we're just going to make sure that they are smooth. So what we're going to do is take a piece of the sandpaper and sand them until we've got a nice smooth section with the plugs being completely level with the outside of the lower gimbal. And we'll make sure of that. Now go through your sandpapers of 4-6000 again, or whichever ones you have, and go ahead and clean again with the alcohol. And then wipe your alcohol clean. Next, we're going to start our reassembly. You'll notice that there's a little alignment plug or a little alignment hole here with a little peg on the lower section of the gimbal. We'll line that up, pull the wires through the bottom, and once you've got that stuck in there, just go ahead and flip her over. And then we need to find out where the actual circuit board is mounting. Once we figure out where the circuit board mounts back onto the bottom, I'm going to mark that. That way I make sure I put that screw in first. So once I've got the circuit board moved and I've marked that, I'm going to go ahead and put that screw in first into the lower, through the base into the lower gimbal section. Go ahead and put in your second screw, which will be the one completely opposite of it, and then flip it back over and we can insert our wires. What you're going to do is put your wires right through the top of the swivel. And remember the indentation here. Make sure that you line the wires on the top section of the gimbal up with the side that dimple is on the swivel. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and grease her up. We'll make sure we get grease on the inside section of the swivel ball right there, and then we need to grease the outside of the center of the upper section that's sticking out of the bottom where the magnet is. Around that whole inside section, that part that's sticking up, we want to grease it on the sides. Now, if you notice right here where the wires are sticking out of that one side, that's what I'm talking about, that we need to make sure that side is lined up with that indentation. This is very important. That is why I'm saying it so many times. I can't tell you how many times I've heard of people putting this back together the wrong way and it pinching them wires off. Alright, now that we're all greased up on the outside of the ball, the inside, and everywhere, we're going to make sure everything's lined up again, and make sure, I know I'm saying it over and over, but it's important. Make sure it's on the right side. Just push the ball the upper section right over the lower section, and it'll pop right in. Kind of guide the wires as you do it and pull them through, and make sure that they're not pinched. Double check by looking on the bottom, and you can see your wires coming through, and make sure that they're not pinched anywhere. And you can see the magnet here and where they come through. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and clean the lower section where my magnet is. I'm just going to clean that off because it got a little grease. And now I'm going to install the sensor and put that plug right back in. It pretty much only goes in one way. And then I'm going to put the screws back in to hold that plug in that holds the sensor. These are very easy. Remember, do not put too much pressure on the screws. You don't want to strip it. Everything that you're using here is pretty much going into some type of plastic. And they don't need to be very tight. Next, we're going to put the circuit board back in. Remember, they are the smallest or shortest screws for the circuit board. And I'll just double check the tightness. And remember, don't go too tight, just nice and snug will be good. Now I'm going to put the ground wires on. That's why we saved them for last and we only put the 2 in. So we'll put these in, and these should be the tightest, and they should be a little more than snug, but just kind of use your own judgment. Don't get them too tight or strip them out. Put that second ground in, and then next we're going to go ahead and plug in our plugs from our wires. Put the large one into the large one and the small one into the small one. Couldn't be any simpler. They just plug in. There's no little clips or anything to worry about. Next, I use my nails to kind of squeeze them together and make sure that they're in nice and snug, and then just adjust the wiring so that it's kind of out of the way. After you've got the wires out of the way, go ahead and flip it over. We're getting there. We're almost done. Now we're going to start greasing everything up a little bit more. We're going to get where our springs go on the outside for the lower section underneath the pressure plate. We're going to grease those poles, get our springs on them. And then once we've got all of our springs on, we're going to start greasing up our pressure plate. And I want to make sure that all the holes in the pressure plate that go over the poles that you just stuck the springs in are all greased up. So I'm going to use a Q-tip, put the grease in there with that. And then I'm going to use my finger with a lot of grease, and I'm going to grease up that whole base plate where the O-ring was. I want this section greased the most. I want a good plate of grease. Then I grease the inside walls of it, and then I'm going to start greasing the actual gimbal itself, where the pressure plate sits and around the side. Now I want a good coat of the grease. Next, we'll go ahead and install the pressure plate. Just line it up and then kind of give it a little bit of a wiggle and a push, and she pops right on. You can test it, just make sure it moves up and down smoothly. Next, remember that we have the little pads at the top of the plastic housing, and we're going to go ahead and grease the inside of the plastic housing just a little bit. And now we're going to grease the outside of the pressure plate. Go ahead and put the plastic housing on. Remember the pads in the upward position. And then we'll grease our spring. And it just needs a really light coat. You don't even really have to grease it, but I do it anyway. Go ahead and stick your spring in. And now we're ready for our upper plate, which is actually the top of the base. So once we've got the upper section of the plate on, we're going to have to push it down and hold it down with our fingers. Make sure you're holding it down smooth the whole time you're screwing the screw in, because it can come up and then strip the insides of the little pole sticking up that holds the screws. You're going to get 2 screws in, then you can go ahead and release the pressure off of it. You can actually release the pressure off of after you get 1 screw in, but I try to wait till I get 2 in. And go ahead and install the other 2 screws. And then next we're going to go ahead and get our little cover plate on. I go ahead and put all the screws in first, and then go back with the screwdriver and then screw them all the way in. But once I've got that plate on, I can go ahead and now put my actual stick handle back on, screwing the locking nut down good. Make sure that it's got a good connection before you screw your locking nut down. Next, I'm going to move into calibration of the stick. Every stick that I've disassembled, this will be the 3rd time I've disassembled. It's been off just slightly when I've plugged it back in and started to play or something. So you have to go into the calibration and recalibrate your joystick. At the same time, testing every button and making sure everything still works properly. Once that's done, you can go ahead and move into the testing and see how smooth your stick now works. And as you can see here, this one is as smooth as butter. It doesn't want to stick anywhere. It works great. It's absolutely perfect. It really is the best stick on the market, in my opinion, in its price range. I haven't seen anything out there that can even compete with it for as accurate and as smooth as what it is once you've got this fix done to it. That's it, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope I've really helped you, and good luck with your sticks. Hope you enjoy them.